I am from eDMZ Security. I am the CTO. And this presentation is on privilege access control. I try to do this as a pretty generic, non-product focused presentation. So what we're really dealing with in this presentation is the issue and what's happening around privileged access. And we'll focus more on our solution and other solutions when we get into the demo portion later in the presentation. But what this will talk about are privileged access, examples of it, common characteristics, and what I try to do when I talk about common characteristics is go across platforms so that we're not focusing on Windows or Unix or any specific platform. Talk about why it's important, give some examples of that. Talk about privileged access control. What do you do around privileged access? How it's done natively across these platforms, and then what are the issues with that? In other words, why have vendors come and try to improve upon what is provided by the OS vendors or the platform vendors? Talk about a little bit around the evolution of it. Privileged access control has been around for probably 15, 20 years. For some of you who've been in this for a long time, this is not a new concept. There have been solutions for quite a while. They've evolved, though, as the requirements and the challenges have evolved. And then I do lean into the wind a little bit. That's a euphemism. I kind of give you some of predictions from what we've seen in the way of where we think the technology is going around privileged access. So first of all, what is privileged access? Users with access to resources at a privileged level or access to critical data. So it can either be what the user has the ability to do or what the user has the ability to get to. Either of those can elevate them to privilege. And then what the interesting piece is as we go around and talk to various different types of customers, banks, manufacturing, commercial, retail, many people have different views of what privileged access means to them. You know, from an ops and availability point of view, I remember talking with a banking customer, and in that case, we weren't actually brought in by security. We were brought in by the availability people because their main concern was maintaining the uptime of their systems. And they saw privileged access as having a direct impact on that because change, especially unintended change or unplanned change, has a direct impact on availability. From change control, same way, any process that has the ability to change production systems, especially outside of the normal process. Obviously, from security and audit, those are who you would typically expect to be interested in privileged access. And then from management, anything that requires approval or review. One comment I got from management was anything that has the ability to get me fired is what they're interested in. So it's, as you can see, it has lots of different definitions. Some examples of it, you know, Unix, on Unix, root, privilege. Again, that's probably one that started this, again, 15 years ago, was the fact that with root on Unix, it's very much of a unrestricted ability to affect systems. You know, especially as in the commercial world, many people were moving off of mainframe environments, which is very segmented, has a very strong privilege model around that. And many people were completely caught off guard when they went into the Unix, when, you know, because of cost, because of capabilities, people started moving from mainframe to Unix or from VMS to Unix, and all of a sudden they were dealing with this root privilege that they had no concept of. What do you mean it can do anything? You know, I'm from a mainframe world. You know, if you don't have this DSN, you're not doing anything. If you don't have this, you know, as this access, we don't have to worry about what you're going to do. And now we're in the Unix environment where the system administrator, you know, you need to have root to mount a drive, and now they have the ability to get to anything on the system. Windows requiring local administrator, you know, As people started to get their hands around Unix, Windows started coming into the environment. Again, changed things for them. Local administrator, a little bit different than root. You know, Windows has some additional capabilities, but the big difference, and we'll talk about this when we talk about how these things are natively provided, is that root is typically an on-demand type of access, meaning that, you know, I came from a banking world. I was with Citigroup from the mid-90s on, and I managed distributed. So on the Unix side, security ended up controlling all the root passwords. So we had ability to know when somebody was going to go to privilege because they needed to request a root password from us. In the Windows world, even though there was more delegation, people who had the administrator capability had it all the time. So now it was no longer a question of when are they going to use administrator, they always had it available to them. So different problems. And then firewalls, you know, most firewalls, even today, are still based on a Unix or a Linux kernel. So even though it's a networking device, or on the Cisco side, the enable password, if you're using, you know, a Cisco type, again, a privileged access. So what are some of the common characteristics of privileged access? It's use of a shared privilege account. So that's your root, enable. The privileged account itself is not individually owned. It's shared by many. You know, all of us in this room could all be administering the same Unix system, and when any of us needed to go to root, we would be using the same root account in most cases. You know, you could have individually named, but at the end of the day, from the OS perspective, it doesn't care. It sees it as UID 0, whether you have, you know, root Kris, root John, root, you know, multiple root equivalent accounts, the OS is still going to see it as one account. Needed by multiple functional groups. So whether you're operations, whether you're systems, whether you're security, you may all need that same privilege to accomplish what you need to on that target system. And it's needed in multiple situations. You know, it's not just emergency, but it could be business as usual or change control. You know, if you're on a Unix environment, you need to install Oracle, you're going to do that with root. So the same root account that's also going to be used by operations to fix a disk full issue. The same root account that's going to be potentially used by security to add a new user to the system. And just to throw some additional complexity in there, these functional teams could be vendors, could be contractors, could be people outside your environment, outside your control. And the issues, I say it's independent of platform, because pretty much whether it's a Unix box, a Cisco router, you have the same issue. Any questions? You can interrupt me at any time. As you can tell, I like to do these somewhat interactively, so.